Hello, 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 hello. Happy beautiful Tuesday to you. Today is all about orgasms, non-ejaculatory orgasms, tantric orgasms, orgasms without ejaculation, energetic orgasms, spiritual orgasm, cosmic orgasm, all that stuff we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about how to have an orgasm without ejaculation too. Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, I'm doing this live right now because number one, this topic is fascinating to me. Number two, learning how to have an orgasm without ejaculation is amazing and it totally changes the entire paradigm of sex. And number three, because my orgasmic mastery course, a 10-week course for men, is starting next week. And I wanted to create some clarity around what it actually means when I say the words non-ejaculatory orgasm. And when I say you can learn how to have an orgasm without ejaculation, what is it that I'm actually talking about? So all of that I want to clarify today. We're going to talk about different kinds of orgasm. We're going to talk about retrograde ejaculation, all kinds of non-ejaculatory orgasms, some of the dangers of different kinds of these things, and how you can do this too. So welcome. Glad you're here. And I see somebody left a comment right when it started saying that on this topic, Montauk Chia has already clearly guided very well. And I do want to give a nod of gratitude for Montauk Chia for creating the book, The Multi-Orgasmic Man. It was something that helped me out in the beginning of my journey, but it was something that for me personally was incomplete. I wasn't able to have the success that I wanted with that book. I needed to go through another bunch of other different workshops and resources to actually figure this out. But I am grateful for him. And the fact that we're all here to talk about this is evidence enough that we need to keep talking about it. So what I would love before going into it is to hear from you right now. I can't see you on video chat, but I see that there's a bunch of us here in a room together. So I'd love to hear from you. Where are you from? Where are you joining us right now? Where is this community of people around the world? If you would put that in the chat, that would be awesome. Helps me get a sense of the community, the network that we have here. I'll put where I am in the chat. I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, United States. I see Montreal. I see LA. I see Tulsa, Oklahoma. I see DC. A lot of, oh, cool. A lot of people in the United States this time. Asheville, North Carolina. All right. Another Asheville guy from Spain, living in Northern Ireland, Brooklyn. All right. New York. Awesome. Yeah. Last time we did this, there were most people from other countries. All right. Here we go. Egypt, India. All right. Welcome. Nice to see you all. Literally a network from around the world. All right. One more icebreaker question. Well, two more icebreaker questions. First one, number one, is how many days has it been since you have last had an ejaculatory orgasm? If you put that in the chat too. For me, it is 15 days. Curious if anybody else in here practices semen retention. That's something that could be helpful on this journey. Again, the question is how many days since your last ejaculatory orgasm? Let's put it in the chat. I see 23 days, 4 days. All right. 2 days, a few weeks. Last time I did this, somebody said about 20 minutes ago. Day 6, today, 2 days, less than a day. Gotcha. Cool. And now, has anybody in this room had an orgasm without ejaculation before? Just put it in the chat if you have. Just say yes, or I've had this. I'm curious if anybody in here has had something like that. 37 days. All right. No, I don't know. I don't know if I've had a non-ejaculatory orgasm. Somebody says, yep. All right. Someone says, yes. Cool. Yes, but rare to happen. Yes. Cool. Well, a couple of folks have had this experience. A number of folks. Awesome. So perhaps today we're going to learn how to have those experiences more consistently. I've got an outline here because there's a lot of things that I wanted to make sure to talk about. I didn't want to miss everything, or I didn't want to miss anything that's important. So let's start off with the basics. Just number one, orgasm and ejaculation are not the same thing, right? We've probably all heard this before. But there are two different processes that happen in the body. And I'm sure some of us in here have had an ejaculation without a full orgasm before. So that's evidence that this is true. And other folks have had an orgasm without ejaculation. So this is a fundamental concept that's useful to start on this journey. Orgasm, ejaculation, two different things. But for the vast majority of men, for the vast majority of our lives, these things seem linked and they are tied together. And it does take some work and intentionality to split them apart a little bit so that we can experience them without the other. Usually, guys don't want to experience ejaculation without orgasm. Nobody's ever asked me how to how to have an ejaculation without orgasm. So we're not going that direction today. Um, Somebody in the chat says definitely happened before. Like, wow, talking about an orgasm without ejaculation. Yes. So one of the first big concepts that's very important to understand here, right up front, difference between a typical ejaculatory orgasm and an orgasm without ejaculation. First thing, a lot of guys, when they think of orgasm, they think of the typical ejaculatory orgasm, right? We have a big peak of pleasure that lasts 7 to 10 seconds, and that's followed by an experience of release. We get emotional release, energetic release, physical release, pleasure release, all this stuff, and we have an exhale. And so many of us have such a strong association between this release and orgasm that it makes it really hard for us to have an orgasm without ejaculation. A lot of guys go into sex or go into masturbation to have an ejaculatory orgasm, to release, to get off. Even the term getting off implies that there's a buildup of pressure that is then relieved from the sexual act. So this is a first very important thing to understand if you're wanting to have an orgasm without ejaculation, is that at least the kind that I teach, and we'll talk about the different kinds here shortly, the kind that I teach involves no release afterwards, because it's not the orgasm that triggers the release, it's the ejaculation that triggers the release. And what is that ejaculation? Or sorry, what is that release? It's a whole slew of neurochemicals and hormones that happen once you have an ejaculation. It's the release of prolactin in your brain and your body that triggers the refractory period. That's the period that makes your penis lose an erection and you lose interest in sex for a little bit afterwards. So when you have an ejaculation, it triggers all of those processes. And when you have an orgasm without ejaculation, it does not trigger the same release chemicals, neurochemicals, hormones, etc. Therefore, if we always have this concept of release and the need to release tension in sex, then our body is going to consistently go towards ejaculatory orgasm, and it's going to make it really hard for us to have an orgasm without ejaculation. I'm going to pause there and see, does what I just said make sense? Can you give me like a yes or a nod, or that does make sense, or no, that doesn't make sense, I need some more clarification? That would be helpful for me, because that's a really fundamental concept that's important right up front. Somebody says, yes, totally, that makes sense. Awesome. That's helpful. Thank you. And we're going to get into specifically how to have these kinds of orgasms without ejaculation. All right, Ryan says, more clarification. Ryan, can you ask specifically what about, like, is there a part of that that you would like some more clarification on? I'll say this another way. When we have an ejaculatory orgasm, there's a lot of tension that's happening in our body, in our breathing, in our pelvic floor and genital area specifically. And this tension gets relieved through the process of ejaculatory orgasm. But this tension also is the cause of the ejaculatory orgasm. And if we learn to relax in the sexual experience, if we're going into sex without needing this release, then we're going to be less tense, which is going to make it easier for us to have a non-ejaculatory orgasm. But also, if we don't need the release, well, yeah, then we're, you know what, I have another concept that will help explain that here that we'll get into. And this is not, just to be clear, I see in the chat, this whole thing is not a sales pitch. Yes, it's true, my orgasmic mastery course is coming up, but I'm going to give you things you can actually do today to improve your sex life and to have these experiences, whether or not you join the course. The course is just a structure to be able to guide you into these experiences because it does take some work. So let's talk about one way to have an orgasm without ejaculation, and it will help make the previous point that I made more clear. And you might have heard of this. This is kind of like the party trick of sex, right? A lot of guys say, and you can do this, that if you squeeze your pelvic floor a lot and if you do a lot of Kegels, you can build up strength in your pelvic floor to the point where when you're going towards a traditional ejaculatory orgasm, you can squeeze your pelvic floor really tight and prevent yourself from ejaculating, but you can still have that experience of orgasm. That is one method of having an orgasm without ejaculation. It's not the method that I enjoy, and there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, it's actually very challenging to get to this point, and it involves a lot of trial and error. But number two, a lot of guys think that they're doing this, but they're actually giving themselves a retrograde ejaculation, which means that the semen will go up into the bladder instead of getting expelled out of the penis. And three, doing this creates more tension. Let's see, I wrote it here. Yeah, it involves contraction in your pelvic floor when you're in the moment of sex, and it involves contraction of your butt muscles, and it involves contraction of your whole body. And it's like, imagine you're having sex with this person, and then you get right up to that point of you're about to have an ejaculatory orgasm. Then you do the squeeze technique, and you're like, "Ugh!" You prevent ejaculation. You still have an orgasmic experience, but you're all tight in your body. That's not ideal. For me, that's not ideal. There's another methodology that allows you to have these experiences without squeezing, and that involves a lot of relaxation. So hopefully that helps to clarify the point that I just made previously about why it's very important to go into sex relaxed. As men in our society, we've received a lot of programming in our belief systems around the idea that we should always have our shit together, or we shouldn't ask for support, or we should always be able to do everything ourselves, or we should always be self-sufficient. Da, 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 da. And what this does for a lot of us is it makes us push our emotions down, and it makes us not have release in a lot of ways. Our emotions can be a great way to release stuck energy. So we seek release through either sex or physical exercise, or we numb ourselves through alcohol or drugs or sugar or porn. These are all strategies that we use to get some sort of release, right? I'm going to say it again. One of the best things we can do is learn how to be easeful and relaxed and not need the release of sex, not need the release of porn, not need the release of all of this stuff. That's so, so, so crucial. And if we can live in that integrated, easeful way, again, this experience of orgasm without ejaculation is going to be much more accessible. So think about this. Another analogy I like to make involves a video game. And if you ever played a role-playing video game or any sort of fighter video game, most video games, you'll see if you're able to select your character or your tank or your plane or whatever, there are all these metrics of different scales of abilities, right? Say I'm choosing a gladiator in this game. There's a section for agility. There's a section for wisdom. There's a section for strength. There's a section for speed. And all these different things have different levels. Maybe speed is at a 30 and agility is at a 4 because it's a gigantic gladiator, but maybe strength is at a 29, right? So for us, there's a lot of guys out there who go to the gym and get really physically strong, and they get mentally strong, and they're able to accomplish all these other tasks. But there's another category that people aren't talking about that's really, really important, and that is our capacity to actually relax, chill the fuck out, and not do so much. And it's kind of counterintuitive because we like to go, 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 get shit done. But we have to build up this category too in order to experience all the amazing shit that we can possibly experience in sex. Does that make sense? I'm going to look into the chat. Love this idea of opening into the experience versus using tension to fight a natural response. Yes, it is all about opening and relaxation. So I know we can't see you, I can't see you, but I'm going to ask us all to take a deep breath. Ryan says, yes, it does make sense. Awesome. Thank you. Interesting thing about doing these YouTube lives is that I can't see you compared to Zoom. It's nice on Zoom where we can all kind of feel like we're in the same room. Here, I still like it and I still love to hear from you in the chat, but there's like this thing where I can't have eye contact with you. So I'm just, everything you can put in the chat helps me know that you're here with me and that you're understanding something or that you're not understanding something. And if you have a question at any point, please put it in the chat and I'll pause every once in a while to go down there and read your questions and your comments. So somebody says, get into the specific method, please. To which I would respond by saying, have patience, brother. Gotta chill. Gotta chill. That's part of the journey. Marcus says, the other guys talked about relaxation as well, and I had a hard time understanding that concept. Yeah, it's tricky. It took me a long time to get it, actually, to really get the relaxation piece. And hopefully the more I talk about it, the more it's going to make intellectual sense to the point where it will convince you to try a couple of things that will help you get there. Welcome, Luca. Glad you're here, able to join us. Welcome, everybody. Glad you're here. Thanks for showing up with me on this call just to talk about sex and sexual mastery and how to have these non-ejaculatory orgasms. This is something that I think everybody should be talking about when we're at the grocery store or wherever. Hey, have you ever figured out how to have a non-ejaculatory orgasm? By the way, it can change your life. I think we need more of these conversations. So I'm going to go over here to my list. Neurobiology of ejaculatory orgasm. We kind of covered that a little bit. Yeah, so just to hit on that again, in terms of the neurochemistry, neurobiology of orgasm versus orgasm without ejaculation, if you have an ejaculatory orgasm, again, you trigger this whole cascade of hormones and neurochemicals that signify to your body you have completed your biological duty as a procreative species. You have impregnated something. Therefore, you can rest, you can relax. You don't have to go out into the world and achieve anything because you've succeeded in completing your biggest mission, right? Yeah. So if you're having multiple ejaculatory orgasms every week, you're telling your system that, oh, I'm succeeding again. I'm succeeding again. I'm succeeding again. I'm perpetuating the species. I'm perpetuating the species. That means I can lay on my ass, eat a bunch of shitty food, take a nap, watch a movie, watch another movie. I don't have to do much. The motivation levels drop. This is one of the reasons why a lot of guys practice semen retention, is because when you retain your semen and you don't ejaculate so often, you do get a boost in testosterone and you do get a boost in all these other categories of life. And one of the theories is that this boost will help you, would have helped our ancestors go out into the world and find a mate to successfully procreate. I think that's a pretty cool concept. Makes a lot of sense to me. I had a chat with a biologist about this, actually, who used to study sperm, who said, that makes a lot of sense too. And he kind of reaffirmed that theory for me. So looking at the chat here, somebody says, relaxation is a hard part. I really struggle with it after I was on NoFap for a year. I lost all my sexual ability and have PE problems now. Happy to learn these things. Man, I want to I want to screenshot that comment because I'm going to take a little picture of that to make another video about that. But I made a video about that recently. A lot of guys who go through NoFap end up having sexual problems and end up giving themselves premature ejaculation or erectile dysfunction because they've pushed sex away for so long and they haven't taken the opportunity to learn how to have amazing sexual experiences or how to have an orgasm without ejaculation or any number of things. And I think NoFap is great for a period of time, but then at a certain point, you've got to start learning how to build a healthy relationship with your arousal cycle and learn how to navigate these realms. So yeah, man, I'm glad you're here, brother. All right. So if I'm not talking about the kind of non-ejaculatory orgasm that comes from squeezing and interrupting, what am I actually talking about? Well, I'm going to read a couple of quotes here from guys who have experienced these non-ejaculatory orgasms. And this is on an article. I'll put it into the chat. I've put more of these. I'll just read a couple right now. But what does an orgasm without ejaculation feel like? Some guy says, shuddering waves of pure bliss, tactile and palatable, like I could ride that wave forever. Another guy says it was a full body experience, like my whole body was tingling especially around my lips and hands. It lasted 5 whole minutes. I felt very energized. Another guy says, it feels like I was floating with this never ending sense of ecstasy. Another guy says, amazing. Energy waves rippled up through my whole body. It's wild. It's wild when that can happen. And so another guy here says, I experienced it full body. It felt as I was ejaculating without projecting. It lasted a longer amount of time, about 5 to 7 minutes. And afterwards, I felt rejuvenated, empowered, and present. So that, fuck yeah, like that's awesome. That's what we're going for. That's what I'm going for. That's what I'm hoping to help you with right now, is get into these spaces. And if you have ever read parts of the Multi-Orgasmic Man book by Mantak Chia, you will probably remember a chart. And at that link that I just put into the chat, if you scroll through that article, you can look at the chart even right now if you wanted to. I'm not sure if it would distract from your browser or whatever, but on this chart, you can see that it's a model of the going up in arousal towards the peak of ejaculatory orgasm and coming back down. But if you look closely, you will see that there's a divergence point on this chart where instead of hitting that peak of ejaculatory orgasm, there's a bypass of the ejaculatory orgasm, and then you can just go up and up and up and up. And that shit did not make sense to me for the longest time. It just made absolutely no sense. And I didn't understand what he was talking about, and I couldn't experience it in my body. So I hope to clarify that right now. The analogy that I like to use is that imagine we're in some sort of auditorium or a mall or some sort of space together, wherever it is, somewhere where there's an escalator. Maybe it's an airport. Most of us know what an escalator is, right? It's these stairs that we get on and it brings us to the next level. Well, in this first model of the arousal scale of 0 to 100, 95 is the point of no return, and 95 to 100 is the orgasm, is the ejaculatory orgasm. That is one particular escalator that is going one particular direction. And part of the problem of the orgasm without ejaculation that I talked about previously, when you're using the squeeze method to separate the orgasm without ejaculation, is that it keeps you on this one particular escalator. It keeps you on this one particular escalator that goes towards ejaculatory orgasm. And then even if you are able to interrupt your ejaculation and orgasm and have a little mini genitally focused contractile orgasm without an ejaculation, you're still missing out on a whole world of pleasure. You're missing out on the world of like full body non-ejaculatory orgasms, cosmic non-ejaculatory orgasms, tantric non-ejaculatory, spiritually, like all this transcendent shit that's possible. You're missing out. So there's another escalator. There's another escalator that doesn't go towards the typical ejaculatory orgasm. And my experience and what I like to teach is that at a certain point of going up the scale towards the typical ejaculatory orgasm, you can jump over to this other escalator, and this other escalator just goes up and up and up and up and up and up and can be more pleasurable than any ejaculatory orgasm you have ever experienced. And so there's a trick to jumping over, because you can't just cognitively think yourself over to the other escalator. But let me pause there and ask you, does that kind of make sense? I would love to know if what I've shared so far makes sense. Let me know in the chat, please. Ryan says, like laughing too much, tingling, oxygen in the body. Aiden says, yes, that makes sense. Aiden, we can get into blue balls in a little bit. I'm going to train here right now towards a different direction, but yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit. All right. So it's kind of like chicken experiences. What does that mean? I'm going to assume that's a typo, unless that's some sort of shit that I'm completely unaware of. John, let me know if that's a typo or if chicken experiences in sex is something that I don't know about. Ron says, talking of relaxation, I just tried yerba mate for the first time, so I'm more alert than usual. Yeah. Does Careza come into it? Yeah, Careza can be a great practice to decouple. So One of the great things about Carezza is that it helps you decouple the associations and attachments you have with sex and ejaculation. And excuse me, that's one of the key things, one of the key steps that you have to do in order to start to experience orgasm without ejaculation regularly is you need to create separation between this association we have with sex means ejaculation. So I have it further down on the list, but I'll just say it now. That's an important step. In order to be able to have these experiences more consistently, you need to be able to have a sexual experience, whether that's masturbating or a sexual experience with somebody else, and not have an ejaculatory orgasm and be fine. And not just fine, but actually feel satisfied and be able to feel pleasure throughout that experience and feel good in your body, because your body and your brain needs to learn that ejaculation isn't always the goal of sex. If you're regularly ejaculating each time you have sex or you masturbate, you're just reinforcing that pattern over and over and over and over again. And your body would have no reason to try to jump over to another escalator. It would just automatically go towards ejaculation. So, learning how to circulate your energy, move it around, and not ejaculate in sex and be satisfied is a very important step that will help you jump over to the other escalator that can go up past the point of no return and be more pleasurable than a typical ejaculatory orgasm. And if you have listened to the podcast that I shared about the first time I had a tantric orgasm, some of those concepts will make a lot more sense too. And you'll hear about my own personal experience with my first like mind-blowing cosmic orgasm that lasted for a long time, that felt like my whole body was ejaculating constantly over and over and over again in every part of my body, but I wasn't even close to the point of having an ejaculatory orgasm because I had totally bypassed it and I wasn't even trying not to ejaculate at that point. Like that's possible. The fucking walls were like undulating. It was a psychedelic experience and I was totally sober. And that's what a lot of people are talking about when they talk about the amazing shit that's possible in sex and the amazing stuff that's possible when you have these orgasms without ejaculation. The tantric practices, the Taoist practices, all these old practices, like they talk about the mystical nature of reality that you can enter into through sex. And that's it. That's it. It really can make the walls kind of do this sort of thing. And I'm looking down at the chat and Qigong. Qigong instead of chicken. All right. That makes a lot more sense. Thanks for that clarification. All right. Qigong chicken. Good stuff. I bet that would taste pretty good if you eat meat. All right. So, just a quick note here. A lot of guys on a journey to have these experiences will find that drinking large amounts of caffeine will actually prevent them from being able to do this because caffeine is a stimulant. And so if you're constantly highly stimulated, it's going to be more challenging for your nervous system to relax and your pelvic floor to relax to the point where you can jump over to the other escalator and go up and bypass the ejaculatory orgasm. All right. So here's what's going to happen next. I'm going to read off a list of different kinds of orgasms. If any of those stick out to you, put them in the chat and we can do a little deeper dive on them. So I'm going to read out a list of these different kinds of orgasms. Then I'm going to talk about spiritual orgasms. And then we're going to go into some specific steps that you can take to actually get into this other escalator and go towards the non-ejaculatory orgasm. So in my course, I have a whole glossary of the different kinds of orgasms that are possible, and I'm just going to read them to you here without sharing much detail. But again, if any of these stand out, put them in the chat and we'll talk about them. Number one is the typical ejaculatory orgasm. We're all familiar with that. Then we have a retrograde ejaculation, which is when the semen actually goes up into the bladder instead of getting expelled through the penis. This is the same thing as a typical ejaculatory orgasm in terms of neurochemistry and refractory period, etc. Then there can be this prostate ejaculatory orgasm that can be incredible. And for any guy in here who has never explored their prostate, like you are missing out. It's so worth exploring. It can amplify your pleasure so much. Then we'll get into a partial body ejaculatory orgasm. So what do I mean by that? I mean that when a lot of us, a lot of guys experience the typical ejaculatory orgasm, it's focused down in the genital region and it's not focused in the rest of the body. If you go watch the video I just posted yesterday from Yuri on my YouTube channel, the guy who just went through my course, you'll hear him talk about how all of his orgasms now are more pleasurable throughout his body. And that's part of this. Like the partial body ejaculatory orgasm is when you've learned to spread your sexual pleasure into the rest parts of the rest of your body. And then when you do have that ejaculatory orgasm, you're like experiencing it in more than just your penis, but maybe your legs feel like they're ejaculating too. Maybe your abdomen and your chest does. The next kind is the full body ejaculatory orgasm. And that's when you've figured out how to spread sexual pleasure throughout your entire body. And then when you do have an ejaculatory orgasm, then your whole, like, it's just 10 times better than the typical genitally focused ejaculatory orgasm. So those are great. And for the record, I'm a fan of those. I like it having ejaculatory orgasms on occasion with intention. So the second category is non-ejaculatory orgasms. So we can have a non-ejaculatory genitally focused orgasm. And this is kind of like what I was talking about earlier when you do the squeeze technique to interrupt your orgasm and ejaculation. Usually for most guys, that's staying really isolated in the genital region because they're squeezing their pelvic floor so hard, and they're squeezing their body and they're creating tension that it can't really flow throughout the rest of the body. Because one of the ways energy flows very easily, more easily, is through relaxation. So that is a kind of non-ejaculatory orgasm. Partial body, energetic non-ejaculatory orgasm. Then there's full body, energetic non-ejaculatory orgasm. And that's where you're able to experience the sensation of orgasm and the peak of orgasm in your entire body without having a typical ejaculation. We're going to have a heartgasm. This is when you have that full body orgasmic experience, but it's also can be coupled with deep emotional feelings of connection and heart opening. I like to put this in a category of itself, and I've got a bunch of paragraphs about it, but I'll just leave it there for now. Then there's gets into some really, really interesting kinds of orgasm that are fascinating to me in the non-ejaculatory space. So the transpersonal non-ejaculatory orgasm. What does that mean? That means that when you're having sex or you're masturbating and you get to this peak of non-ejaculatory orgasm, you somehow merge either with your partner or with something that's greater than yourself. You're not as ego identified as, oh, I'm Taylor having this orgasm. Like you're something that's bigger. You know, maybe you identify as like man as an entity itself, like the very concept of man versus your name. I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of heady, but it's fascinating to get to these places. And then we get into the spiritual orgasm, the tantric orgasm. So what does that mean? To me, again, there's a lot of different semantics involved, and there's a couple other different categories I didn't mention, but a spiritual orgasm could be one in which you're having a full body non-ejaculatory orgasm while you are also experiencing deep, deep connection with spirit, with God, goddess, with life itself, with something greater than yourself, with your partner, but not just your partner as their name, but your partner as life itself. And you're experiencing connection with all of these things. And it's like fucking amazing. It's fucking amazing. And the first time I had this experience, I like cried for an hour afterwards. And I just went out into the forest and I just sat there and I thought like, holy shit, I've lived my whole life not knowing this was possible. Wow, I had no idea. I had no idea how amazing sex could be. Last one I'll talk about right now is the transpersonal spiritual cosmic orgasm. This one is exceptionally fascinating. It's when so again, transpersonal, we're bigger than just ourselves. So say, for example, I am experiencing this moment as life itself. Like I am life perceiving life in this moment, just as you can identify if you choose to. You could even try it right now to listen and see me talking here. You could experience yourself as life versus just your name of Jacob or John or or Brandon or whatever, right? Like you can identify with this thing that is larger than yourself. And from this space of non-ego identification, have the full body peak orgasm experience, and not just peak, but have it rolling and rolling and going on for minutes and minutes and minutes on end. And it's fucking incredible. And it's fascinating. And this is something that is not super easy to just jump right into. Like you need practice to get to that point. But I'm going to pause there because I just shared a whole bunch of things and I'm curious to look at the chat and see if any of those stuck out for you. All right, let's see. Ejaculation, you're missing. Yeah, cool. Awakening. Yeah. Kevin says, I lived my whole life not knowing this is possible. Yeah, totally. So the process of jumping over to the other escalator. I always hear anecdotes about that. Yeah, one time, honestly, like the first time it happened for me unexpectedly. But when I look back at that, and I won't tell you the whole story now, you can go back and listen to my podcast about how I had my first tantric orgasm. There were a number of things about that experience that led to me being able to unintentionally jump over to that other escalator that I didn't normally do in my sexual experience. So that's definitely worth listening to, and it would take a little while to explain right now. Somebody says, everything in the internal bracket truly stood out for me, especially the last two. Yeah. And I recognize that some of the last couple of kinds of orgasm that I just shared, the last couple of kinds of non-ejaculatory orgasm, those could be uncomfortable concepts for some people, right? I said, you can orgasm with God or goddess or life force or spirit or whatever you want to say. Some people have negative associations with those sorts of things or don't want to mix sex and spirit. And like, that's cool if that's you. Personally, I want to. I think life is fucking amazing. We get to be alive in these bodies. And I believe that by merging sex and spirit, we can experience so much more. We can experience so much more. And for me, this was a missing link my whole life. I grew up very interested in spirituality, also very interested in sex, but these two different aspects of life were split for me. And my experience growing up in the Christian church and my experience exploring different kinds of meditation and stuff afterwards always just like pushed sex away and didn't talk about it. And so I had this split of being very interested in spirituality and energetics, and then also like masturbating to porn and wanting to have sex with women. And it created this like, yeah, an unhealthy, just an unhealthy lifestyle of sex, honestly, that led me down the path of all kinds of sexual dysfunction, like premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, sexual anxiety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when I finally learned that it was possible to merge sex and spiritual practice, it changed everything for me. And so we're going to get into just now steps to get into the full body non-ejaculatory orgasm. But I do want to share this one more piece since it just came up right now about spiritual practice and sex, sexual energy. That is something that you can experiment with. That's something that you can practice. So for example, if my girlfriend and I are having sex and we want to dive into this, we can take a pause and breathe more deeply and tune into that place of, you could call it prayer, you could call it reverence, you could call it bhakti, you could call it devotion, you could, whatever you want to call it. You internally go to that place in connection with your lover while you're making love, while you're having sex, and it will fundamentally change your experience of lovemaking. It's so worth trying. And if you're single and you don't have a partner to practice that with, that's fine. You can also explore this with yourself. And this is a really, really fascinating exercise to do. And I invite you / encourage / challenge you to try this, is to at some point set yourself up time to do a ritual, lay down on your bed, whatever, light candles, put some music, and decide to masturbate self-pleasure for 20 to 30 minutes for a minimum. And then while you're in that space, while you're touching yourself, don't look at porn, don't fantasize about the most visually attractive thing you can fantasize about. Try this. Try conjuring up this internal experience of prayer. Try experiencing sexual pleasure with life itself. Try to cultivate a sexual relationship in that moment with life or spirit or God, goddess, whatever you want to call it, and see what happens. It's wild. It's wild. And if you spend some time there, you will be probably very pleasantly surprised by what you can experience. And this is an exercise that will help you also be able to have these non ejaculatory orgasms more frequently. Because when you masturbate for 20 to 30 minutes at a time, you're training your body and you're training your brain to recognize that ejaculation isn't the goal of sex because you're not ejaculating in 2 or 3 or 5 minutes. And you're also going into this place of deep relaxation and embodiment. And that's crucially important to be able to experience these orgasms without ejaculation. Crucially, crucially important. So I'm going to pause here and look at the comments. Somebody says, first time I experienced it alone, but then we synchronized. It was really, really meaningful. Yeah. Somebody says, I feel like you have to let go of ego itself. Yes. Yeah. Specifically in order to get into the transpersonal, non-ejaculatory orgasmic realms or transpersonal sex, that implies letting go of the ego. You don't have to let go of your ego in order to experience a non-ejaculatory orgasm. I can do that as Taylor. You can do that as you, Jacob, whoever whatever your name is, you can do that as you. You don't have to detach from your ego to have that experience. But these sorts of things where people are talking about the spiritual orgasm, the cosmic orgasm, the tantric orgasm, that kind of stuff, that involves a dissolution of the ego identified self. And it usually doesn't happen with a cognitive effort to make that happen, if that makes sense. So how do you make that happen? How do you jump over to the other escalator? And I see somebody say, how does it compare to psychedelics? That is a fucking awesome question. Thank you for that. We will have time to get into that after I go into these next steps. So, steps to having full body, non-ejaculatory orgasms. Number one, I encourage all guys to do this, is to start masturbating only for a minimum of 20 minutes at a time before you ejaculate. This is like ground level one for all guys to improve their sex life. Because again, for most guys, we need to decouple ejaculation as the goal of the sexual experience. Most guys masturbate to ejaculation in just 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then they're done. When you spread that out, even if you ejaculate at the end of 20 minutes, there's a lot of stuff that's happening in those 20 minutes because you're relaxing into the experience. Ideally, you're relaxing into the experience. You're breathing deeply. You're making some sounds. You're letting your system acclimate to pleasure that's just starting to permeate your entire system. And that's going to open some doors internally in terms of potentially your microcosmic orbit, the way your prana flows, the way your energy flows throughout your entire body. So that's ground number one. Number two, yes, do practices to build up your strength, agility, etc. at the gym. But number two is to also do things in your life that builds your capacity to experience relaxation in your body. That could be yoga. That could be receiving massages. That could be doing yoga nidra. That could be just sitting on your front porch and reading a book. That could be drinking a cup of tea. That could be going for a relaxing walk in nature. Doesn't necessarily matter exactly what that is, but what matters is your internal state. And it's really important for us to be able to cultivate and experience this internal state of deep relaxation because we need that in the sexual experience in order to unlock the non-ejaculatory orgasm and jump over to this other escalator. So those are two lifestyle practices that are super, super, super important. And again, I just want to say that I understand that it might sound a little counterintuitive if you're wanting to have a non-ejaculatory orgasm. And I say you need to learn to relax more, but it's so fucking important. And in our society, we're just programmed to go, 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 go. Especially we've got our phones with notifications constantly and Snapchat and Tinder and news and all this shit. Bah, 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 bah. We got to slow down and let our nervous system relax and cultivate that as a practice that will help us in all areas of our life. So, number 3 of the steps, tools, techniques to have non-ejaculatory orgasm. Again, what I'm about to share will help you jump over to the other escalator. Try doing things that will get you into a flow state while you are making love. So specifically, breath work, that kind of thing when you're having sex, doing that 10, 20 times, 30 times, that will fundamentally change your physiology, but more equally importantly, it will help get you out of your head and into your body and make it more likely that you enter a flow state. Other things that will help you enter a flow state are making sounds like that, or moaning, or like, yeah, moaning, making sounds. Another thing is smells. Smells are a really powerful and underutilized way that we can all enter into a flow state more easily, because a flow state is one where you're in your body, you're not in your head, you're totally immersed in the moment, and you're not having any specific attachment to an outcome. So possibly light some incense, burn a candle, or smell your partner and allow yourself to get totally enraptured by your partner's smell. That is a great way that can help you get into a flow experience. Another thing that will help with this is creating a lifestyle practice of meditation. So I meditate every day. Right now, I've committed to myself to meditate for a minimum of 13 minutes a day for the first 3 months of this year. And there's some research to back that number 13, but that's what I am doing. You can do meditation regularly, you can do yoga regularly, you can do Qigong regularly. And these things are very important because what do? They help program your brain, they help rewire your brain to be able to be more present in the moment without getting distracted by thoughts. And getting distracted by thoughts is one of the killers, one of the destroyers of your ability to have an orgasm without ejaculation. Because maybe you start thinking about not wanting to ejaculate, or you start thinking about wanting to have an orgasm without ejaculation, or you're thinking about what you want your partner to do or what they don't want you to do, or you're thinking about whatever the fuck you're thinking about. And it takes you out of your body, and it takes you out of your relaxation, and it takes you out of the moment, and it makes it next to impossible to have A, an amazing sexual experience, but B, an orgasm without ejaculation. And so, yes, those are lifestyle practices, but those will help you in the moment of sex jump over to this other escalator. And what you will notice, the more you do this, the more you practice this, the more you allow yourself to really get into sex, and the more you get into a flow state in the sexual experience, the more you're just naturally going to you're going to like see, not with your eyes, but with this sort of like intuitive, energetic seeing, you're going to see this other potential in sex while you're in the sexual experience. And you can kind of make this like energetic jump, if you will, with a commitment to yourself and a recognition like, oh, ejaculation is not the goal here. And oh, I'm so in it. Again, this is not an intellectual thing, but your body will like pivot and just like move over to this other escalator. And then all of a sudden, you will be experiencing pleasure, sexual pleasure, and you won't be going up the escalator towards ejaculation. You'll just be so immersed in the moment that you will start to experience pleasure moving through your entire body. I hope that that makes sense. It's not the sort of thing that you can just think like, I'm going to have a non-ejaculatory orgasm right now. Like the kinds that I'm excited about, the kinds that have really been amazing in my life have happened when I've been completely immersed in a flow state experience in sex, when I'm breathing deeply, when I'm doing the practices that allow me to be fully present and not worried about ejaculating. And then this other doorway opens up. This other escalator just appears seemingly out of nowhere. And it's like, here's another possibility. You don't even know this was possible. It's as if you're playing Super Mario Brothers and you never knew that the gold star was a thing. And all of a sudden somebody like threw the gold star at you and hit you with it. And you just like immediately had these increased abilities. Like it can switch like that in sex. And it's really fucking magical when that happens. And you can't cognitively make it happen, but what you can cognitively do is choose to breathe deeply, to do sexual breath work while you're having sex. You can choose to moan, you can choose to make sound, you can choose to smell your partner, you can choose to light candles beforehand, you can choose to just get totally absorbed in the experience. You can choose to put on music that will help you cultivate that experience of presence and deep connection with yourself or your lover. There are all these things that you can choose that will set the container and the environment for success. You're basically priming your system for success. And it takes all that work to be able to, when you're in the moment, boom, make that jump over to this other experience. And that's when it can happen. That's when it can sort of spontaneously happen. And once it starts to happen, you can ride it and it can go for a long period of time and it can be fucking amazing. Like mind-blowingly amazing. And it might not be like the full explosion that you're thinking of at first, you know? It might just feel like a shimmer of heat going up your spine, or you might feel a little shimmer of sexual pleasure in your arm or in your chest or something like that. And that's a good sign because it means that's starting to spread. And with practice, that can happen more, and that can happen more, and that can happen more. So I'm going to take a deep breath. I invite you to do the same. Mm. All right, I'm going to look at the chat here. Smell is awesome. He would smell is awesome. Taste. I didn't even say taste. Yes, thank you for that. Taste can be another great way to do this. Tasting your partner, tasting their sweat, tasting their genitals, all this stuff. Somebody says where intention goes, energy flows. Absolutely. Yeah. If you're focused on not ejaculating or you're focused on practices to avoid ejaculation, your mind and your body is going to be focused on the concept of ejaculation. And the idea is you will do enough breath work, you'll do enough other practices that you won't be having to think about that. And you don't want to be thinking about how to have a non-ejaculatory orgasm in sex either, because that will take you out of the moment. Again, you want to be doing the practices that will make it likely for an ejaculatory orgasm to happen. You want to create the environment for this to happen. And so this is something that for most guys takes a while to be able to get to. Like most guys are not going to be able to go home and try masturbating, try having sex for a time or two and actually experience this. For me, it took a long time. First, it started with a period of, I guess you could call it nofap. I didn't even hear of the term nofap back when I did this, but I first went on a big sexual journey when I was living in Thailand years ago, and I decided, all right, I'm going to stop watching porn. I'm going to totally rewire my sexual response system. I was in a residential long-term tantric retreat, and the instructor said, all right, if you want to be able to experience more pleasure, here are the things you got to give up. Ting, 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 ting. Mindless ejaculation, sexual fantasy while you ejaculate, porn-like fantasies specifically, porn, etc. And honestly, it took me weeks before my erection would come back. And I thought, oh, fuck, I have fucked myself up because I've watched so much porn in my life. I'm never going to be able to have an erection again. I got all kinds of nervous and concerned about this. And thankfully, with their guidance, they kept saying, Taylor, you just got to keep doing the practices, keep breathing, keep the meditation thing going. Eventually your erection will come back and it will be stronger than it ever has been before. And that was true. But it did take a few weeks of this. And after it took a few weeks of that, it took months before I was able to more consistently experience those kinds of heightened pleasure. And I just want to normalize that. And I like to share the analogy that we'll start with a reality check that for some reason, for whatever reason in our society, there's this strange belief around sex that people think that we should just be good at sex. Like we should just understand sex and know how to do it well and know how to do all these different techniques that make sex more awesome. And yes, it's true that most of us know how to put a penis in a hole, right? We know how to penetrate somebody. It's quite self-explanatory. But all the other techniques that are involved in sex that make it amazing, like we need to learn those. We need to spend time learning those. Like for example, if you want to learn jujitsu, nobody's immediately really good at that. You're going to go train for an extended period of time, and it takes time to become really good at that. And that's the same thing that happens with our sexual response system. It takes time to be really good at that. You can watch a whole bunch of jujitsu videos on YouTube. You can watch a bunch of martial arts, self-defense, fight videos on YouTube. But if you're not actually practicing this stuff in your body, it's not going to change anything. You can just have these as nice little intellectual concepts. So what I encourage you to do after watching this live is not just think, oh, that's nice. I think I'll do that sometime, but actually create a regimen for yourself. Like, create a practice regimen, do some of the things that I talked about, and that's going to allow your body over time to begin to open to this other state that's possible. And that is why I created the Orgasmic Mastery course, because there are other pieces to this as well. And it's very helpful to do this in a community of other men who are also wanting to learn how to do this, and to show up every week and to be in a room where we can all see each other. We can talk about our wins and our challenges and our celebrations, and we can problem solve and troubleshoot. And it's amazing. And a lot of guys say that one of the most beneficial parts of that course and that whole experience is actually just being able to have conversations with other guys about sex, because it dismantles all the shame and the baggage and the emotional shit that we've carried our whole fucking lives around sex. Because our society is really fucked up when it comes to sex, in my opinion. We got to unwind that. So there's links to that all over my website and YouTube. And I'm going to pause there because you've heard me talk about it. Orgasmic Mastery course starting next week, January 12th. And now, oh, wow, that was a whole hour. Are there any last burning questions here? If you have a burning question, please put it into the chat right now, and I will answer it while we're coming up here at the end of this live. Key pointer here is to get into a flow state trance. Yes, that is one of the key points, Ben. But it can't just be that. You need to come at it from all these other different angles too. Man, something got in my throat. All right. Focus, orchestrate. Is hyper breathing good for having NEOs? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by hyper breathing, but breath work is incredibly, incredibly beneficial. Wonder if anybody here, have you ever done any sort of Wim Hof breath work, or any sort of transformational activating breath work where you breathe intensely for an extended period of time? If you've done that, then you know that at the end of that, when you pause, basically, even if you're doing it for a long period of time, it can happen while you're breathing. You'll know that you start to feel different in your body. You start to feel tingles. You start to feel energy moving other places. And when you pause and you do a breath retention at the end of that breath work, you can enter into some pretty wild spaces in terms of transpersonal, cosmic, spiritual, energetic, whatever you want to call it. Imagine combining that with orgasmic pleasure. Like, that's what I'm talking about. Like, that's possible. And it's exquisite. It's exquisite. Anything else in the chat? Let's see. What's the best way? Okay, here's a good way to close. What's the best way to do 13-minute meditation? I'll just share how I meditate briefly. I sit down. I sit down on a cushion and I focus on 3 different things. Number 1, I focus, depending on what I want to cultivate, either I open my eyes and look out at my external environment and practice being present with my external environment, or I'll focus internally on the sensations in my body. That's number 1. Number 2, I will focus on my breath, and I will continue to breathe slowly in and out all the time. And you'll notice that as humans, we have the capacity really to focus on 2 things with our attention. If you start to try to focus on 3 things, you will kind of lose your attention a little bit. Like, if I asked you right now to focus on your left knee, your right shoulder, and just those 2 things, you could probably focus on the sensation there. But if I added the back of your head too, you'll notice that something kind of breaks a little bit with your cognition and your brain. So I focus on those 2 things, the external environment or my internal environment, and my breath. Number 3. Number 3. And this is from research and a book that looked at what do Tibetan monks and yogis do when they meditate. You can do a 3rd thing with your intention, and that is to cultivate an internal experience. So I practice the inner smile meditation while I am focusing either on my external or internal environment, and while I'm focused on my breath. And I try to cultivate joy, and I try to cultivate compassion and a smile, because you can cultivate an internal emotional experience while you are splitting your attention in 2 different places at the same time. And that is very, very powerful practice. And here's the thing, a lot of people who are not familiar with meditation will say that, oh, it's hard, or I can't meditate because I'm having thoughts come in. But the thing is, whenever you're meditating and you have a thought come in and you refocus, bam, that right there is changing your brain. That is the practice of meditation right there. You are experiencing success in that moment, because success in meditation is training your mind to continue to come back to the moment over and over and over again. So experiencing thoughts is not the problem. And experiencing a number of thoughts doesn't mean your brain is bad or you can't do meditation. It means it's giving you opportunities to work and work and work and improve your brain over and over and over. And the more you do this, the more you will realize that it becomes easier to meditate, and then your state will change in all areas of your life, including the sexual experience, over time. And it's definitely worth doing. All right. Let's all take a deep breath together. Hmm. Thank you, friends, for your time. Thank you for showing up here. I really, really appreciate sharing the space with you. I hope this was helpful for you. Really do put a lot of effort into trying to make sure I covered a lot of bases here. And if you want to go deeper, of course, you can sign up for my Orgasmic Mastery course. It starts next week, January 12th. There's already a bunch of guys enrolled from around the world. It's going to be awesome. If you can't, there is a free ejaculation control guide on my website too. That includes a bunch more practices that I did not have time to mention in this call. That's an awesome way to move forward. I also have the free 7-day semen retention challenge, which is a great way to move forward as well. And once this video finishes processing, I'll put all those links in the description. But if you have any questions about my upcoming course, feel free to jump on Instagram, shoot me a DM. It is at Taylor Clark Johnson. You can shoot me an email as well. And yeah, I just want to say thank you so much again for being here, for showing up, for thinking about this stuff. Thank you for doing some of these practices. And I hope you thank yourself for showing up here, and your future self thanks you too. And I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Peace, gratitude. I will see you next time.